Imagine a man so feared his name alone silenced Spain, a priest whose faith fueled a reign of terror that sent thousands to the stake. Tomás de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition, was not just a religious zealot. He was a mastermind of fear, orchestrating a brutal campaign against heretics in the late 15th century. His icy gaze and relentless cruelty made him a living nightmare, yet he believed he was saving souls. How could a man of God become a symbol of horror? If you're ready to uncover the chilling truth about this twisted figure, hit that subscribe button like this video and share it with your friends to dive into history's darkest corners. Let's start with Torquemada, the man whose shocking obsession with purity ignited a firestorm of persecution. Born in 1420 in Valladolid, Spain, Tomás de Torquemada grew up in a devout Catholic family with Jewish ancestry, a secret that would later haunt his legacy. A Dominican friar by his 20s, he was known for his ascetic lifestyle, wearing coarse robes, fasting often, and shunning worldly pleasures. Yet beneath this piety lay a chilling trait, an unyielding obsession with religious purity that bordered on paranoia. Chronicles describe him as gaunt, with a hawk-like face and piercing eyes that seemed to see into your soul. By 1480, at age 60, he caught the attention of King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, who saw his zeal as a tool to unify Spain under Catholicism. Torquemada's rise came during a turbulent era. Spain, newly unified under Ferdinand and Isabella, was a patchwork of Christians, Jews and Muslims, with tensions simmering after centuries of religious coexistence. In 1478, the Spanish Inquisition was established to root out heresy, and by 1483, Torquemada was appointed Grand Inquisitor. His fervor was unmatched. He believed heresy was a plague that threatened Spain's soul. Historical records estimate he oversaw the trials of 100,000 people, with 2,000 jailed to 10,000 burned at the stake. His methods were ruthless torture devices like the rack and waterboarding were standard designed to extract confessions. One 1484 report describes a victim's screams echoing through Toledo's dungeons as Torquemada watched unmoved. His shocking trait was his ability to justify cruelty as divine will. Torquemada saw himself as God's enforcer, his faith twisted into a weapon. He lived simply refusing meat and sleeping on a straw mat, yet ordered lavish auto-da-fe ceremonies, public spectacles where heretics were paraded and executed. Modern psychologists suggest this reflects a pathological need for control akin to authoritarian figures like Heinrich Himmler. His Jewish ancestry, noted in 15th century chronicles, may have fueled his zeal, a desperate bid to prove his loyalty to the Church. Spain's Jews and conversos, converted Jews, bore the brunt, with thousands expelled or killed under his watch. For victims, Torquemada's Inquisition was a nightmare. Families were torn apart, accused of secret Jewish practices based on flimsy evidence, like lighting candles on Fridays. One 1485 letter from a Seville merchant describes his wife's torture for heretical cooking. Torquemada's shadow loomed large, but how did he build an empire of fear from a monk's cell? The next chapter takes us into the heart of his Inquisition, where his brutal vision reshaped Spain. The machinery of fear. Tomás de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, turned Spain into a crucible of terror, his obsession with purging heresy fueling a machine of torture and execution. By the 1480s, his Spanish Inquisition was a well-oiled engine of fear, its tendrils reaching every corner of society, from humble peasants to wealthy nobles. Behind his monk's robes and fervent prayers, Torquemada crafted a system so ruthless it crushed lives with chilling efficiency. How could one man's zeal transform a nation into a prison of suspicion? If you're gripped by this chilling saga of Torquemada's reign of terror, hit that subscribe button like this video and share it with your friends to uncover more shocking tales from history's darkest corners. Let's dive into the machinery of the Spanish Inquisition, where Torquemada's vision of purity became a nightmare of betrayal and pain. By 1483, when Torquemada was named Grand Inquisitor at age 63, Spain was a nation on edge. King Ferdinand IV and Queen Isabella, eager to unify their kingdom under Catholicism, gave him unprecedented power to root out heresy. Torquemada, a Dominican friar with a gaunt frame and unyielding resolve, saw his mission as divine. He believed Jews, Muslims, and conversos Jews converted to Christianity threatened Spain's spiritual purity. Historical records estimate the Inquisition under his leadership tried 100,000 tolerant people between 1483 and 1498, with 2,000 to 10,000 executed, often by burning at the stake. His system was methodical. Informants were paid to report neighbors, priests encouraged confessions, and trials were shrouded in secrecy. Torquemada's methods were horrifyingly efficient. He established tribunals across Spain in Toledo, Seville, and Zaragoza, where accused heretics faced interrogation. Torture was standard. The rack stretched victims' limbs until bones snapped, while waterboarding suffocated them with wet cloths. A 1486 chronicle describes a Toledo dungeon, where a woman's screams echoed as Torquemada observed his face impassive, believing her confession would save her soul. The auto da fe, or act of faith, was his signature spectacle. Public ceremonies where heretics dressed in sackcloth and pointed hats were paraded before execution. One Seville auto da fe in 1484 saw 30 people burned, their ashes scattered as crowds watched in horror and awe. His personal life was a paradox. Torquemada lived ascetically, sleeping on a straw mat and eating sparse meals of bread and water. Yet he orchestrated lavish auto da fe processions with trumpets and silk banners. His Jewish ancestry, noted in a 1490 letter by a rival cleric, was a closely guarded secret, possibly driving his relentless persecution of conversos to prove his loyalty. Modern psychologists suggest this reflects a form of self-loathing, akin to internalized prejudice seen in modern authoritarian figures. His paranoia infected Spain. Neighbors turned on neighbors, fearing accusation. A 1485 Seville record tells of a tailor betrayed by his wife for lighting Sabbath candles, tortured until he confessed to secret Judaism. For victims, the Inquisition was a living nightmare. Families were shattered. Children, orphaned homes, confiscated. One merchant's daughter, testifying in 1487, described her father's arrest for owning a Hebrew prayer book. He was burned, and she was left destitute. Torquemada's tribunals offered no mercy even to the innocent, as confessions were coerced under pain. Modern historians like Henry Kamen argue his system thrived on fear, creating a surveillance state that foreshadowed modern totalitarianism. His power grew, but so did resistance, whispers of defiance among conversos and nobles alike. How long could Torquemada's iron grip hold Spain in terror before his enemies struck back? The next chapter explores the rebellion against his tyranny and the cracks in his reign of fear. The rebellion against the Grand Inquisitor, Tomás de Torquemada's Spanish Inquisition, was a machine of terror, crushing lives under the weight of his fanatical quest for religious purity. By the late 1480s, his tribunals had turned Spain into a land of whispers and dread, where neighbors betrayed neighbors and thousands faced torture or the stake. Yet beneath this iron rule, sparks of resistance flickered. Conversos nobles and even some clergy dared to defy the Grand Inquisitor's tyranny. Could a man who claimed to serve God withstand the growing tide of rebellion? If you're gripped by this chilling saga of Torquemada's reign of fear, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends to uncover more shocking tales from history's darkest corners. Let's dive into the rebellion against Torquemada, where courage clashed with his brutal vision. By 1487, Torquemada, now 67, was at the height of his power, his gaunt figure a specter across Spain. Appointed Grand Inquisitor in 1483 by King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, he had transformed the Spanish Inquisition into a relentless force, trying an estimated 100,000 people for heresy, with 2,000 to 10,000 burned at the stake. His tribunals in cities like Toledo, Seville, and Zaragoza operated with chilling efficiency, using torture racks, waterboarding, and hot irons to extract confessions. A 1487 chronicle from Seville describes an auto da fe, where 40 heretics clad in sackcloth were paraded before execution, their screams drowned by chants of priests. Torquemada, ever present, watched with cold conviction, believing he was purging Spain's soul. But resistance was brewing. Conversos Jews who had converted to Christianity were his primary targets, accused of secretly practicing Judaism based on flimsy evidence, like owning a menorah or avoiding pork. Many conversos, wealthy merchants or scholars, resented their persecution. In 1485, a group of conversos in Toledo plotted to assassinate Torquemada, planning to ambush him during a procession. The plot, uncovered by his informants, led to brutal reprisals. Trial records show 6 conspirators were tortured and burned. This failed rebellion only hardened Torquemada's resolve, but it exposed his vulnerability. Modern historians like Joseph Perez argue this plot marked the first organized resistance, showing that fear could breed defiance. Nobles and some clergy also chafed under his rule. Torquemada's power, granted by the monarchy and Pope Sixtus IV, rivaled that of Spain's elite, who resented his seizures of property from convicted heretics. A 1488 letter from a Castilian noble complained of Torquemada's unholy greed, noting that confiscated estates enriched the Inquisition. Even some priests criticized his methods. A Dominican friar in Zaragoza was imprisoned for calling the auto da fe a mockery of Christ's mercy. Torquemada's Jewish ancestry, whispered among rivals, fueled accusations of hypocrisy, with one 1489 chronicle claiming he targeted conversos to bury his own past. Modern psychologists suggest this reflects a projection of self-doubt, akin to authoritarian figures who mask insecurity with cruelty. For victims, the Inquisition was a relentless nightmare. Families were torn apart. A 1487 Seville record tells of a mother tortured for teaching her daughter Hebrew prayers, both exiled after confessing under duress. The poor suffered most, unable to bribe officials for leniency. Torquemada's system thrived on fear, with paid informants creating a culture of betrayal. Yet resistance grew secret. Jewish rituals persisted in hidden cellars, and pamphlets mocking the Inquisition circulated in Toledo. These acts of defiance, small but bold, challenged Torquemada's vision of a pure Spain. How long could his tribunals silence a nation stirring with rebellion? The next chapter takes us into the expulsion of Spain's Jews, where Torquemada's influence reached its devastating peak. The expulsion of the Jews and Torquemada's triumph. Tomás de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, had forged a Spain where fear ruled his Spanish Inquisition, crushing lives under the guise of divine purity. By 1492, his relentless crusade against heresy reached a horrifying climax, with the expulsion of Spain's Jews, a decree that shattered communities and reshaped a nation. His zeal, cloaked in monks' robes, drove thousands into exile, their suffering a testament to his unyielding vision. How could one man's faith unleash such devastation? If you're gripped by this chilling saga of Torquemada's reign of terror, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends to uncover more shocking tales from history's darkest corners. Let's dive into the expulsion of the Jews, where Torquemada's influence cast a shadow that changed Spain forever. By 1492, Torquemada, now 72, was a towering figure in Spain, his power as Grand Inquisitor rivaling even the monarchy. Appointed in 1483 by King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, he had turned the Spanish Inquisition into a machine of persecution, trying an estimated 100,000 people for heresy, with $2,000 to 10,000 burned at the stake. His tribunals, operating in cities like Toledo and Seville, used torture racks, waterboarding, and hot irons to extract confessions from Jews Muslims and conversos converted Jews. But Torquemada's obsession with a pure Catholic Spain demanded more than trials. He sought to eradicate entire communities, starting with the Jews, who numbered around 200,000 in Spain. The Alhambra decree, issued on March 31, 1492, was Torquemada's crowning achievement. Pressured by his relentless lobbying, Ferdinand and Isabella ordered all Jews to convert to Christianity or leave Spain by July 31, 1492. Historical records describe Torquemada presenting the monarchs with evidence of conversos secretly practicing Judaism, arguing they undermined Spain's unity. A 1491 letter from Torquemada to Isabella warned the Jews poison our faith. Exile is God's will. The decree forced Jews to sell homes and businesses at a fraction of their value, with many facing robbery or murder on the road. Estimates suggest 50,000 to 100,000 Jews fled to Portugal, North Africa, or the Ottoman Empire, while others converted under duress, facing lifelong scrutiny as conversos. The expulsion was a human tragedy. A 1492 chronicle from Toledo describes families trudging to ports, their children starving as bandits preyed on exiles. One rabbi's diary recounts a mother selling her jewelry to buy passage for her sons, only to die of fever in Morocco. Torquemada, unmoved, saw the decree as a divine triumph, overseeing auto da fe ceremonies where relapsed conversos were burned. A Seville auto da fe in 1492 executed 20 Jews who refused conversion, their ashes scattered as Torquemada prayed nearby. Modern historians like Benzion Netanyahu argue the expulsion was as much political as religious, consolidating royal power. But Torquemada's fanaticism was its driving force. His personal contradictions fueled his cruelty. Living ascetically, fasting, wearing coarse robes, Torquemada wielded immense wealth from confiscated Jewish properties, which funded the Inquisition's tribunals. His Jewish ancestry, whispered in 1490s court circles, may have intensified his persecution, a desperate bid to erase his own heritage. Modern psychologists compare this to authoritarian figures like J. Edgar Hoover, who targeted perceived enemies to mask personal insecurities. For Spain's Jews, the expulsion was a catastrophe, destroying a vibrant culture that had thrived for centuries. Conversos who stayed faced constant fear their lives under Torquemada's watchful eye. Resistance persisted in secret. Jews hid Torah scrolls in cellars, risking death, but Torquemada's power seemed unbreakable. Yet as his health declined, whispers of his mortality grew. Could his reign of terror outlast the man himself? The next chapter takes us into Torquemada's final years, where his legacy and enemies collided in a dramatic reckoning. The personal toll and Torquemada's inner demons. Tomás de Torquemada's Spanish Inquisition had turned Spain into a land of fear, its tribunals, and the 1492 expulsion of the Jews, leaving a trail of broken lives and shattered communities. Yet behind the Grand Inquisitor's ruthless crusade lay a man wrestling with his own contradictions, a monk whose ascetic life masked a tormented soul, possibly haunted by his Jewish ancestry and unyielding zeal. As his power peaked, the personal toll of his actions began to surface, revealing a figure both feared and fragile. What drove a man to burn thousands while praying for their souls? If you're gripped by this chilling saga of Torquemada's reign of terror, hit that subscribe button like this video and share it with your friends to uncover more shocking tales from history's darkest corners. Let's dive into the personal cost of Torquemada's crusade, where his inner demons cast a shadow as dark as his deeds. By 1493, Torquemada, now 73, was the unchallenged architect of the Spanish Inquisition, his tribunals having tried an estimated $100,000 people, with $2,000 to $10,000 burned at the stake. The Alhambra decree expelling Spain's Jews had cemented his influence with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, but it came at a cost. Chronicles from the period describe Torquemada as increasingly frail. His gaunt frame stooped from years of fasting and sleepless nights spent in prayer. He lived in a modest cell in Avila's Dominican monastery, refusing luxuries, yet wielded power over life and death, his orders sending families to torture chambers or exile. A 1493 letter from a Toledo priest noted Torquemada prays like a saint, but judges like a devil. His Jewish ancestry, a secret whispered among rivals, was a source of inner conflict. Born to a family of conversos, Jews converted to Christianity, Torquemada faced accusations of hypocrisy, documented in a 1492 court record, where a noble called him a Jew, cloaked in crosses. Modern psychologists suggest this may have fueled a pathological need to prove his Catholic loyalty, driving his brutal persecution of conversos. His paranoia was evident in his personal life. He traveled with armed guards fearing assassination after the 1485 Toledo plot against him. A 1494 chronicle describes him eating alone, refusing food, unless prepared by trusted monks, convinced enemies might poison him. This fear mirrored the terror he inflicted, a grim irony that trapped Spain in a cycle of suspicion. The human toll of his actions was staggering. Conversos lived in constant dread, accused of heresy, for minor acts like washing hands before prayer. A 1493 Seville record tells of a family of 5 tortured for owning a Hebrew book. The mother died under the rack, her children exiled. Torquemada's auto da fe ceremonies, where heretics were burned in public, were spectacles of horror and propaganda. One 1492 event in Toledo saw 25 people executed, their families forced to watch as flames consumed them. For victims, the loss was not just physical, but spiritual. Many conversos coerced into conversion felt betrayed by a church promising salvation. Modern historians like Henry Kamen compare this to modern genocides where ideology justified mass suffering. Torquemada's isolation grew with his power. He shunned personal relationships, living ascetically, while amassing wealth from confiscated properties, which funded the Inquisition's expansion. His estrangement from his family nephews and cousins avoided him, reflected his obsession with purity over human bonds. Modern psychological analysis likens him to figures like Joseph Stalin, whose paranoia and rigid ideology alienated even allies. Yet resistance persisted. Conversos smuggled Jewish texts, and secret synagogues thrived in hidden rooms. As Torquemada's health faltered, whispers of his mortality spread. Could his crusade survive without its fanatical leader? The next chapter takes us into the twilight of Torquemada's life, where his final acts and enemies shaped his dark legacy. The twilight of tyranny. Tomás de Torquemada's Spanish Inquisition had plunged Spain into a crucible of fear, its tribunals, and the 1492 expulsion of the Jews, leaving a legacy of shattered lives. By the mid-1490s, the Grand Inquisitor, now frail and nearing the end of his life, faced mounting resistance and whispers of his own mortality. Yet even as his body weakened, his zeal burned fiercer, driving him to tighten his grip on a nation trembling under his shadow. Could a man so consumed by divine purpose outlast the enemies circling him? If you're gripped by this chilling saga of Torquemada's reign of terror, hit that subscribe button. Like this video and share it with your friends to uncover more shocking tales from history's darkest corners. Let's dive into the twilight of Torquemada's life, where his final acts of cruelty and defiance cemented his infamy. By 1495, Torquemada, now 75, was a shadow of the fiery monk who had reshaped Spain. His health was failing. Chronicles describe him as skeletal, his hands trembling from years of fasting and relentless work. Yet as Grand Inquisitor appointed in 1483 by King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, he remained unrelenting. The Spanish Inquisition under his command had tried an estimated 100,000 people with 2,000 years to 10,000 were burned at the stake for heresy. His tribunals spread across Toledo, Seville, and Zaragoza continued to operate with ruthless precision, targeting conversos, converted Jews, Muslims, and anyone suspected of defying Catholic orthodoxy. A 1495 record from Valladolid details the torture of a merchant accused of hiding Jewish texts, his confession extracted through waterboarding, as Torquemada's agents watched. Torquemada's final years were marked by paranoia. His Jewish ancestry, a secret whispered among rivals, fueled accusations of hypocrisy. A 1494 letter from a Seville cleric called him a wolf in monk's robes. Fearing assassination after the failed 1485 Toledo plot, he lived in a fortified monastery in Avila, surrounded by armed guards. He refused food, unless prepared by trusted monks convinced enemies sought to poison him. This fear mirrored the terror he inflicted with informants paid to betray neighbors, creating a surveillance state. Modern historians like Joseph Perez compare this to modern totalitarian regimes where paranoia sustained control. Torquemada's isolation was profound. Estranged from family and shunned by nobles resentful of his power, he clung to his mission as divine. His cruelty intensified despite his frailty. In 1494, he pushed for stricter laws against conversos, suspecting many of secretly practicing Judaism. A Toledo auto da fe that year saw 15 people burned, including a pregnant woman, whose plea for mercy was ignored, her execution recorded in a 1495 chronicle as a warning to heretics. Such acts sparked outrage. Conversos and some clergy began circulating pamphlets denouncing Torquemada's unholy justice. One 1496 account describes a secret meeting of conversos in Zaragoza, planning to smuggle Jewish families to Portugal. These acts of defiance, though small, showed cracks in Torquemada's empire as Spain's people grew weary of living in fear. The human toll was heart-wrenching. Families were torn apart. A 1495 Seville record tells of a tailor's son, aged 12, tortured for his father's alleged heresy, left orphaned after both parents were executed. Victims' confiscated properties enriched the Inquisition, funding its expansion while leaving survivors destitute. Modern psychologists liken Torquemada's zeal to authoritarian figures like Pol Pot, whose rigid ideology justified mass suffering. His Jewish ancestry may have driven his relentless persecution, a desperate bid to erase his own heritage. As his health deteriorated, rumors spread that his end was near, yet his tribunals showed no mercy. Could his vision of a pure Spain survive his death, or would his enemies finally break free? The next chapter takes us into Torquemada's final moments and the battle over his legacy. The enemies within and without Tomás de Torquemada's Spanish Inquisition had turned Spain into a land of dread, its tribunals crushing lives under the weight of his fanatical quest for religious purity. By 1497, the Grand Inquisitor, now frail and nearing death, faced growing opposition from within Spain and beyond its borders. Nobles, clergy, and even the Vatican began to question his brutal methods, while conversos and exiles plotted in secret to undermine his legacy. Yet Torquemada's zeal burned brighter than ever, defying his enemies with a ferocity that chilled even his allies. Could a dying man hold his empire of fear together against a rising tide of defiance? If you're gripped by this chilling saga of Torquemada's reign of terror, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends to uncover more shocking tales from history's darkest corners. Let's dive into the enemies circling Torquemada, as his final battles revealed the cracks in his iron rule. By 1497, Torquemada, now 77, was a ghostly figure, his body ravaged by years of asceticism and relentless work. As Grand Inquisitor appointed in 1483 by King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, he had overseen the trials of an estimated 100,000 people, with 2,000 to 10,000 burned at the stake for heresy. His tribunals in Toledo, Seville, and Zaragoza continued their grim work, targeting conversos Muslims and suspected heretics with torture devices like the rack and waterboarding. A 1497 chronicle from Valladolid describes an auto da fe where 12 conversos were executed, their families forced to watch as flames consumed them. Torquemada, too weak to attend, sent orders from his Avila monastery, his will unbroken. Opposition was mounting. Within Spain, nobles resented Torquemada's power, which rivaled their own. His seizures of heretics' properties worth millions in modern terms enriched the Inquisition, but alienated the elite. A 1496 letter from a Castilian duke to Ferdinand complained of Torquemada's tyranny over our lands, noting confiscated estates crippled local economies. Some clergy also turned against him. A Franciscan friar in Seville was arrested in 1497 for preaching that the Inquisition mocked God's mercy. Beyond Spain, the Vatican grew uneasy. Pope Alexander VI, elected in 1492, received complaints about Torquemada's excesses. A 1496 papal letter urged restraint, but Torquemada ignored it, claiming divine authority. Modern historians like Henry Kamen argue this defiance strained his relationship with Rome, hinting at a loss of control. Conversos and exiles fueled resistance. After the 1492 Alhambra decree expelled Spain's Jews, many fled to Portugal or North Africa, where they spread tales of Torquemada's cruelty. A 1497 account from a Portuguese rabbi describes exiles forming secret networks to smuggle conversos out of Spain, risking death to preserve their faith. In Spain, conversos hid Jewish texts and held clandestine rituals defying Torquemada's spies. One 1496 Toledo record tells of a converso merchant tortured for owning a Torah scroll, his defiance, inspiring others to resist. Torquemada's Jewish ancestry, rumored in court circles, intensified accusations of hypocrisy with a 1497 pamphlet, calling him a traitor to his own blood. Modern psychologists suggest this conflict drove his paranoia akin to authoritarian figures like Stalin, who crushed dissent to mask insecurity. For victims, the suffering was relentless. A 1497 Seville diary recounts a family of 4 burned for secret Jewish prayers, their home seized, leaving their surviving daughter homeless. The Inquisition's informants created a culture of betrayal, tearing communities apart. Yet resistance grew bolder with whispers of plots to assassinate Torquemada. As his health crumbled, his enemies sensed opportunity. Could they topple the Grand Inquisitor before death claimed him? The next chapter takes us into Torquemada's final moments, where his last acts and legacy faced a dramatic reckoning. The fall of the Grand Inquisitor. Tomás de Torquemada's Spanish Inquisition had cast a shadow of terror across Spain, its tribunals, and the 1492 expulsion of the Jews, leaving a nation scarred by fear and loss. By 1498, the Grand Inquisitor, now a frail figure at 78, was nearing death, his body worn by asceticism, and his mind haunted by enemies and secrets. As resistance grew among conversos nobles, and even the Vatican, Torquemada fought to preserve his vision of a pure Catholic Spain. Could a dying man cling to power as his empire of fear began to crumble? If you're gripped by this chilling saga of Torquemada's reign of terror, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends to uncover more shocking tales from history's darkest corners. Let's dive into the final days of Torquemada, where his fall revealed the cost of his brutal crusade. In 1498, Torquemada was a ghost of his former self, confined to his cell in Avila's Dominican monastery. His health, ravaged by years of fasting and relentless work, left him skeletal, his hands trembling as he penned orders for the Inquisition. Appointed Grand Inquisitor in 1483 by King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, he had overseen the trials of an estimated 100,000 people, with 2,000 to 10,000 burned at the stake. His tribunals, still active in Toledo, Seville, and Zaragoza, continued their grim work, torturing suspected heretics with racks and waterboarding. A 1498 chronicle from Seville describes an auto da fe where 10 conversos were executed, their families weeping as Torquemada's agents chanted prayers over the flames. His enemies were closing in. Nobles resentful of his power and the Inquisition's seizure of their lands pressured Ferdinand and Isabella to curb his influence. A 1498 letter from a Castilian lord complained that Torquemada's tribunals bleed Spain dry, impoverishing regions by confiscating heretics' properties. The Vatican under Pope Alexander VI grew increasingly critical. A 1498 papal decree called for mercy in Inquisition trials, a rebuke Torquemada ignored, claiming divine mandate. His Jewish ancestry, a secret whispered in court, fueled accusations of hypocrisy. A 1498 pamphlet circulated in Toledo, branding him a Jew who burns his own kin. Modern psychologists suggest this conflict intensified his paranoia, mirroring figures like Robespierre, whose fear of betrayal drove ruthless purges. Conversos and exiles abroad kept resistance alive. In Portugal and North Africa, Jewish communities preserved their culture, smuggling texts and aiding escapees. A 1498 account from a Moroccan rabbi describes exiles teaching Hebrew to children in secret, defying Torquemada's legacy. In Spain, conversos risked death to hold clandestine rituals, their courage a silent rebellion. One 1498 Zaragoza record tells of a converso woman tortured for hiding a Torah scroll, her defiance inspiring others. The human toll was devastating. Families were shattered like a Seville tailor's, whose 1498 execution left his children orphaned and destitute. Modern historians like Benzion Netanyahu argue Torquemada's Inquisition created a surveillance state, foreshadowing modern authoritarian regimes. Torquemada's isolation deepened. Estranged from family and shunned by nobles, he relied on loyal monks, his paranoia leading him to suspect poison in every meal. As death loomed, he issued final orders to intensify trials, desperate to cement his vision. But could his fanatical dream outlive his failing body, or would Spain reject his legacy? The final chapter takes us into Torquemada's death and the haunting aftermath that defined his place as history's zealot of terror. The death and enduring curse of Torquemada. Tomás de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, had turned Spain into a crucible of fear. His Spanish Inquisition and the 1492 expulsion of the Jews, leaving a nation scarred by torture and exile. By 1498, at 78, he was a dying man, his body frail, but his zeal unyielding, even as enemies, nobles, clergy, and defiant conversos challenged his reign of terror. His death was meant to end an era of horror, but his legacy became a haunting specter, shaping Spain and history with a chilling shadow. What mark does a man leave when his faith fuels a nightmare? If you've been gripped by this chilling saga of Torquemada's tyranny, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends to uncover more shocking tales from history's darkest corners. Drop a comment below. Was Torquemada a zealot for God, or a monster of his own making? Let's dive into his final moments and the cursed legacy that haunts us still. On September 16, 1498, Torquemada died in his cell at Avila's Dominican monastery, his body wasted by years of fasting and relentless work. At 78, the Grand Inquisitor, appointed in 1483 by King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, left behind a Spain transformed by fear. His Inquisition had tried an estimated 100,000 people, with 2,000 to 10,000 burned at the stake for heresy. His final days were marked by paranoia. A 1498 chronicle describes him refusing food, fearing poison, and dictating orders to intensify tribunals from his deathbed. Surrounded by loyal monks, he prayed feverishly, his gaunt face lit by candlelight, convinced his work was divine. A monk present at his death noted he whispered of God's judgment, but his eyes held no peace. Spain mourned and rejoiced. His death ended a 15-year reign that had torn families apart. A 1498 Seville record tells of a converso family exiled after torture, weeping with relief at his passing, yet fearing the Inquisition's continuation. The human toll was staggering. The 1492 Alhambra decree had expelled 50,000 to 100,000 Jews, while thousands of conversos faced torture or execution for secret rituals. One Toledo woman's 1498 diary recounts her brother's burning for owning a Hebrew prayer book his children left destitute. Torquemada's auto da fe spectacles, where heretics were paraded and burned, had become symbols of terror, their ashes a grim warning. Modern historians like Henry Kamen estimate the Inquisition's economic damage with confiscated properties crippling communities. Torquemada's legacy was a paradox. His Jewish ancestry whispered in court fueled accusations of hypocrisy. A 1499 pamphlet called him a traitor who burned his own blood. Modern psychologists compare his zeal to authoritarian figures like Pol Pot, suggesting his paranoia and self-loathing drove his cruelty. The Inquisition continued after his death, but his successors lacked his fervor, and resistance grew. Conversos preserved their faith in secret, and exiles in Portugal and the Ottoman Empire rebuilt Jewish communities. His vision of a pure Spain faltered. By the 16th century, Spain's economy weakened partly due to the loss of Jewish merchants and scholars. Modern analyses like a 2023 study argue his policies foreshadowed modern genocides, prioritizing ideology over humanity. The cultural impact was profound. Torquemada's name became synonymous with fanaticism, inspiring literature like Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, where the Grand Inquisitor embodies rigid dogma. His tribunals created a surveillance state, a precursor to modern authoritarianism. In Spain, ghost stories emerged with villagers claiming his spirit haunted Avila's monastery, a cursed figure, unable to find peace. A single artifact, a charred prayer book found in a Toledo cellar, stands as a testament to the lives he destroyed. Torquemada was not just a man. He was a warning of how faith can twist into terror. If this tale of Tomás de Torquemada shocked you, subscribe to Weird History Unveiled like this video and share it to spread these chilling stories. Comment below. Was Torquemada a product of his era's zeal or a singular evil? What historical figure should we uncover next?